Cooper, and she was supposed to be my advocate in Nebraska. She did not do her job, or anywhere near her job. But that's not what this video is about. We watch a lot of shows that are made in Great Britain. There's a bunch of stuff on YouTube from the UK. We can watch a lot of different British TV shows on YouTube. One thing that the British and the Germans like to push real heavy, and the Russians as well: America, 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 America. Look at what the Americans did to the Native Americans. Look what the U.S. government did to the Native Americans. And then we look at all of British history, all of German history, all of French history, all of Russian history, and it's all literally the same thing. Literally the same thing. Enslavement of indigenous peoples. China going all the way back to the beginning of their history. Enslavement of indigenous individuals. Wholesale slaughter. Now let's talk about the Maori people. Let's take a look at Native Americans. Let's just look at Native Americans. How many Native Americans were slaughtered by loyal British subjects, loyal French subjects? Who started the scalping business? It certainly wasn't Native Americans. It wasn't Americans either, because there was no America. There was no United States when that scalping business started. A lot nicer than the Maori taking heads. Man, that's a fucking filthy business. When we start looking at Samoa, even more nasty business. So, of course, the British did what they often did. They made false treaties with people who didn't have the right to give away everybody's land. This is British politics, and continues to be British politics to this day, by the way. Oh, those are brown people. They have lots of land. Well, we should take that land from them. Let's go lie to them. We'll write a piece of paper for them saying that they can have what they want. We'll write a piece of paper that we're going to give to the Queen that says that the Queen of England gets what she wants. And then we'll enforce what the Queen of England wants. So these Maori peoples, they come together and they elected themselves a king to help offset checks and balances, they thought. It should have been, that is absolutely what their agreement was, a system of checks and balances. We'd have to wait for the United States to create such a thing, and it doesn't work, by the way, just so you know. The United States system of checks and balances depends on if your checks bounce. Do you like that? System of credit, a system of ownership. This is the Roman rental system, folks. They used it everywhere. Even people that were no longer enslaved, that were freed, most of them still lived in extreme poverty. For many people, when you're talking about 10 to 15 people all trying to live in an area twice as wide as my car, That's a lot of people stuffed into one area. That's what we've got on a lot of atolls as well. Lots of people crammed into one little area. The British, they did this all over the place. One tactic that they used was well, the British told this Maori king, they said, oh, well, you know, you can't be a king because we already have Queen Victoria and your loyal subjects. The guy that they put in charge of it was a guy that obviously the Maori people did not like. And of course, he told all these tribes that this one little town was a safe haven, that he would not attack it. And what did the people on the island have to say about it? Well, you told us to send all of our women and our children there because it would be safe. That was a safe place that you would not attack. So we sent our women and children there. And instead of you coming and fighting the men, you went and burnt our children and women to death. That's exactly what the British did. But they didn't just do it there. The British, throughout their history, were always liars. Always. Always. They lied to everyone. Everyone. Broke every treaty they ever made. And then complained that America broke every treaty with the Native Americans that it ever made. Huh. Now let's take a look at India. Let's take a look at French Indochina. Lots of Brits were over there killing Asiatic folks over the French. Insanity. Let's talk about the British in Hong Kong. Absolutely. Let's talk about the idealism that brought Japan to isolationism to begin with. Lots of foreign people trying to push more power than they had. And of course, it took overwhelming military firepower and Commodore Perry to pull Japan out of that isolationism. Now, when we look at what the British did here in the American colonies, we look at what they did in South America, the French as well, and the Spanish. Here in America, we often identify the Spanish with Mexicans. Dark skin, dark eyes, dark hair, primarily. So when we think Spaniard, we've got this vision of a Southern Italian. Okay. Or a Southern Greek. These are all dark-skinned people. If you took an old man, an old Maori, and you put him next to an old Greek, well, it would depend on which one you stood next to. But you wouldn't really be able to tell the difference. Brown-skinned people. The Greeks, we gave them a lot of credit because they were considered Europeans. Sort of. In some places, they're considered to be Arabic. That's not how Western society sees them. Well, American Western society. We also take a look at how these brown people had their own trade network all the way across the equator, going as far north as Alaska, and of course, as far south as at least Chile, Argentina. The Polynesian Triangle is much bigger than we give it credit for. A lot of the words that are used in the Tlingit language are similar to words that are Polynesian. There's also words of, God, let's see if I can pronounce this right. It's a particular sect of Phoenicians. They were the first Phoenicians. They apparently sailed there in canoes and all sorts of other really cool legends. Now, this sounds like the Maori people later on, the Samoans. The thing is, the Boer Wars, that was a fairly modern war. We say that the United States is the only ones who got their freedom back from Britain, the greatest nation in the world, because of their wooden walls, their boats. We're the only ones that gained our independence from Great Britain through force, but that's not true. The Boer Wars showed that. The situation with many of the Polynesian islands and a lot of the British holdings, French holdings. After World War II, after realizing that an Asiatic power could whoop the living shit out of a bunch of European powers, and that's really what it was. The European powers did not have anything in the Pacific whatsoever to speak of. There was no chance in hell of them being able to win a war against Japan without the United States' involvement. Nothing they could do but get their asses whooped. And they did. Now, there was a lot of Polynesian islands that were owned by the Brits, and the British, of course, true to form, did not keep their treaties anywhere. Anywhere. Not with the Polynesians, not with the Boers, not with India. Nobody. So, after World War II, while the British Empire is trying to maintain its empire, all these other nations were saying, no, we want to be independent of you warmongers, money mongers, resource mongers, land mongers. Britain, you have your own land. Stay on your fucking island. Stay on your island. Keep your troops on your island. That's your island. Now, the British, for the most part, didn't try to pull any of this conquest stuff with Christian nations, primarily Protestant nations. The warfare that was between Britain and France, as well as Britain and Spain, those were primarily defensive wars. I say primarily because Britain started it. They just couldn't back their shit up. They thought their boats would save them. Instead, the ocean saved them. Ocean storms. More than once. Going all the way back through history. You know, if there wasn't a storm, Admiral Nelson probably would have died a lot sooner. He would have died in his 20s. He writes about that in his memoirs. A storm. Same thing at Trafalgar, though. Yeah, as the story goes, the French were shaking and quaking in their little ferry boots. And the Spanish were looking at the French going, why'd we let them be in charge? They're all idiots. That's the historical account, but really, it was a storm. That storm offset the wind. Battle was already engaged. They were already in firing range by the time that happened. Now we got the Brits. Want to keep on pointing out, what about the Native Americans? What about the Native Americans? What about the Native Americans? What about the diseases you brought to the Samoans? How about the diseases that you brought to the Hawaiians? We're talking about population sizes of between 200,000 and 2 million in some places. And they were reduced to about 40,000 people worldwide. Holy fuck, that's a fucking lot of damage to a people. Now, one thing that Europeans have learned, and definitely learned well, there's 2 wars. One of them was with the Samoans, and another one was with the United States during the Civil War. Hill forts. Turns out hill forts are a hell of a great idea when you're having to deal with artillery. And as a result, during World War I and World War II, in some places, we set up our artillery defenses. That's defenses against artillery. In the same way that multiple Maori convictions, I guess is the word that was used in one of the videos. Basically, people had adopted a certain way of thinking for different regions, and those became different tribal congregations, I guess. The British, as always, played people off of each other. Always a Cold War. Get one group against another. Now, when the British decided to do that on New Zealand fucked them up. More than once. But that was one of those situations where a whole bunch of people got burned to death. Women and children in specific. The guy said, hey, send all of your women and children to this town. It's a safe haven. We will not attack there. We, the British, will consider this a safe haven. We will not attack there. And the first thing he did, he was already marching there. He had the letters written, letters to each of these peoples on the island so that they would know that their children would be safe. He allowed that. But then the message that came after that, the ultimatum to each of these tribes, he didn't deliver that message. He just went and fucking burnt down the village where he'd told them to take their women and children. And one of the excuses was that it was part of the supply route. He didn't fight it, he just burned it to the ground. That didn't just happen in New Zealand. It didn't just happen in Samoa. It didn't just happen in Malaysia. Same thing happened, of course, in the Pacific Northwest. Same thing happened in the Southwest. Same thing happened in Texas. Y'all might go, oh, well, you know what? This is all United States territory. The Spanish were fucking brutal. Brutal. And then once they started losing stuff over here, a lot of their fleets and boats, they ended up becoming very slow. More modern ships with a deeper keel were able to keep up. Merchant ships, they tend to sit lower in the water. So when you've got a lot of military craft, let's say you've got a big merchant Indiaman, right? You've got maybe maximum 30 guns on the goddamn boat. You got 6 broadsiders on each side, and then you got some swivel guns, and you might have a couple of big guns if you're lucky. You probably have 4 or 5 little squatters. They're deck mortars, and they're shit. They're only good for something that's up close, which, of course, most of your sloops, which is what they're going to be sending after you, they don't have any more cannons than you do. You're just a much bigger target and a much slower target. And even the warships of the day with a deeper keel could catch up fast. Now, when it came to Polynesians, Native Americans, Native Australians, it didn't matter to the British. If you were brown, you belonged to the crown. This racist crap that we're still going through today, this was all started by Great Britain. Started by a legacy of superiority, a superiority complex. The same thing I see happening in the United States today, this superiority complex. The idea that we're better than everybody because we are mighty. But what I don't see is military expansionism. Thank goodness. It is not our destiny to conquer the planet. The fact is, we need to take care of our own people before we start telling the rest of the world how they should be living. Should we follow the British model? Absolutely fucking not. The British were and are a brutal people. Talking nice, but being brutal. One of the things that I speak out about so often, people smiling when they say pretty things. The British, just like the United States, the only time they ever kept their word is when they said they were going to kill you. If they said they were going to hang you, they'd invest a lot of fucking resources to hang you. Between making a compromise and just killing everybody. Killing everybody is the British way. Between fighting a battle against a worthy opponent and destroying women and children in their houses, the British have always gone for the latter. Always. Open warfare, well, there's a lot of resources that can go into warfare before you get into open warfare, like bribes. Well, you give one tribe muskets, the other tribe doesn't have muskets. Now you got to teach them how to use them muskets. You don't want them getting slaughtered while they're reloading. So then you got to train them a bit. But on the bright side, that's a tribe that's on your side. And of course, when the father dies, that trinket of a firearm is probably going to go to one of his relatives who's probably still on your side because you give them guns. The entirety of British culture is built around that. All of it. Subjugation of subject nations. Subjugation of lesser peoples. Now we've got a bunch of British liberals, don't we? British liberals who not only believe that their native lands should be utilized in a different way than what the government wants, but also that a lot of their former subjects should bow to their will. It don't matter what you call them. People are people. Everybody's got an opinion. You say to mind your business. Usually when somebody says that you need to mind your business, it's something that you probably shouldn't mind your business on. When somebody's molesting kids in your town and you're told to mind your business, it's probably not a good time to mind your business. British have been affecting global events going back over 1,000 years. When it comes to trade, we like to sell this version of history where the native peoples of North America, the native peoples of North Alaska, and of course the native people of Hawaii would have never known each other. Well, you can see in their bloodlines and in their boat building that absolutely there were Pacific Islanders who landed on the west coast of what's now the United States, the west coast of the Aleutian Islands, the west coast all the way down through Mexico, Panama, all the way down. You can find Pacific Islander bloodlines. Now they're saying those bloodlines would have been around the 13 to 1500s. I don't know how the geneticists would be able to figure that out, but I'm not a geneticist. Probably because of, well, what bloodlines were a part of the Polynesian culture at that point in time. Because when we're talking about Polynesian culture, we're not talking about Maori, we're not talking about Samoa, we're not talking about Hawaii. We're talking about all of them. They all have the same bloodline, all of them. Now, we only have one bloodline, apparently. I was watching some of these films, and whether they're true or not, I don't know. But apparently there's only one tribe that doesn't have, God, what's the name of that empire? King Xerxes. Persians, that's what it is. Native Americans have Persian blood. Now, how is this even possible? Well, Polynesians have Persian blood. Chinese, you can find Persian blood in them. The reason for this is because the Persians, well, they enslaved a lot of people or encompassed a lot of area. One of the things among Persians was that, much like the Romans, you had to be accepting of people who were different. Some Romans were blonde-haired and blue-eyed. Some Romans were black as night. It's how they were described. Including, there was a black emperor who died in Great Britain, Scotland actually. We'll have to make sure that we point out he died in Scotland. The Persian Empire was much the same. They encompassed a very large area. They encompassed a lot of the area that Genghis Khan later conquered. They encompassed parts of India. They encompassed parts of what's now Russia. They had a lot of area. So, of course, during the Persian Empire, there was a lot of intermixing of cultures and bloodlines. And when that empire fell apart later, conquest by others, those bloodlines did freely travel. We know the Silk Road had people going from, well, all the way from Great Britain, 2 different routes, all the way across all of Asia to get silk, to trade spices. We've come to realize that much of those trade items that we had in North America, the only reason that it was a worthy trade item is because it was already here. Many of those peoples, they wouldn't have traveled across an ocean to get something they could have made with a rock. Okay, it'll take me 8 hours to make a rock into something like that. It may not last as long. It may last longer. Who knows? If I break it, I can make another one. But if I got to go all the way across the ocean to get one and bring it back, it's not really worthwhile. A lot of the trade items and trade goods that we found, like we found China. I don't mean the nation of China, but, fine porcelain, small vessels. We found them in South America. Now, who would have brought them there? Would it have been the Chinese? Not likely. More likely the Polynesians. Chinese vessels, Chinese junks. I'm not saying they're not seaworthy, but they're designed as coastal vessels. They're designed round-bottomed for a reason. Polynesian boats, on the other hand, fast, super fast. I mean, we're talking about, if you can get a massive seagoing kayak with the wind, seagoing canoe with the wind, you're going 40 knots. That's speedboat fast. This is super fast, and it's wind-powered. Now let's look at the HMS Victory. Between 8 and 15 knots, top speed. 8 and 12 knots, top speed. We'll talk about some of the sloops. Could go up to, 18, 19 knots? 23 knots for a Bermuda sloop. But again, we start looking at Tahiti. We start looking at Haiti. We start looking at a lot of different places where it's cultural migration. It's also cultural conquest. It's also conquest by right of conquest. There's also conquest by changing people's way of thinking. This is what the Samoans did. They got sick of them Tongan fucks coming over and fucking whooping their asses a little bit at a time. The Tongans come together as a big group, go whoop the shit out of one Samoan group, another Samoan group, another Samoan group, and then go back home. So the Samoans got tired of getting their asses whooped. What'd they do? They invited the Tongans to dinner and then fucking slaughtered them. It's effective. British did that often. This is a very common tactic. We like to talk about how horrible it is that the Samoans would take heads, or how the Native Americans would take scalps. But then the British, what did they demand? Hands. Also, if you were a thief, they'd hang you. Literally hang you. Some of the Polynesian peoples, when they visited Great Britain and saw that, more than one of them asked if they could take the condemned men home with them instead of watching them hang. Because where they're from, utilizing resources is not against the law. The concept of theft really didn't fit. And that's because of the power of mana. You don't want to take from others. Like, let's say there's an heirloom item. Let's say you've got a Tongan War Club, or a Samoan War Club, or a Hawaiian War Club. It's a boat war, and it might have been passed down through your family to you. In the Tlingit tradition, it's a little bit different. I want to say, I'm not going to be able to pronounce the word right, but it's similar to your mana. Your mana is poured into your ore, so each person would have to make their own. You didn't pass down your paddle to your son or your grandson. Your son or your grandson had to make his own. But the idea or concept of an insult, in the Tlingit society, it was seen very much the same as in Samoan society, until much later. Later on, the Tlingit, they adapted well, it wasn't adapted. It was always there, the idea of we're all brothers and sisters, unity and all that. Matter of fact, the Tlingit people were one of the first in North America, or in the United States, sorry, to try to form together with other Native American alliances, like the Six Councils, and then the Four Councils over by Butte, and then there's the Seven Nations Council over in mostly along the eastern seaboard, and then you've got the First Nations, and that's well, it's a tribal confederacy now of like 5 different nations, I believe. And then we got the Three Rivers, and that council. And because of the Tlingit people, a lot of these different Native societies are sharing information. They're inviting each other to other cultural gatherings. And also the Tlingit people have extended this to Samoa and to Hawaii and to Guam and to also New Zealand and several other Polynesian nations. It's important for our cultural heritage. And I don't mean Native Americans. I'm not a Native American, except I was born in America. So technically I am, but by bloodline I'm not. However, when it comes to the Polynesian bloodline, when it comes to the Russian bloodlines, or the Chinese, or even the British, Romans, Greeks, and even South Africans, the bloodlines all converge as Persian. Along any of these trade routes, and many of these ancient trade routes go back at least 30,000 years. 30,000, that's a really long time. We consider the Silk Road to be something that's only about 1,000 years old. No, the Silk Road was well into use by the time the Romans came into power. Because of instability with Europe, and also because of infighting and several invasions by the steppe peoples over into China, the Silk Road was cut off for a long time. But it was eventually reestablished and reopened by the Arabs. And that reintroduced silk and a lot of other fine items to Europe. And it was the finer things in life that were important. It was no longer about human life or the struggle it took to bring you those nice things. It was about your status as a person. The manna of a person was different for the Maori people. I've been learning about a lot of the different tribes that were involved in a lot of the different wars over in, well, because I'm studying boats, right? And they're showing a lot of the seafaring and wayfinding and how it was lost and why it was lost and what a douchebag Mr. Cook was. I'm going to get back to that study now because, well, I need to end the video. I need to pee. There is some of the stuff that the Hawaiians do. There's a dance that they do. And you make your eyes real big like this, and you yell, and you move your body, and it's supposed to be scary. And, well, you guys get to see on my channel, when I get to hooting and hollering and screaming and shouting, I can really make myself look scary. All right, so I want to extend out to Hardin, Montana. I know there's I gotta say my people, because although I'm not Crow, I'm not Lakota, Dakota, or Nakota, I was treated extremely well up there. I was treated like family. And to hear of the loss of Mary Mountain Sheep, you know, she didn't have to be good to me. She had two of her friends were staying in her house while she was gone. They invited me to their place. I went to their place, and that happened to be the night that Mary got home. And she was mad at them, not at me. And she treated me like I was family. She made sure to introduce me to people that were her people. And that's very important. I also fully support the Tlingit outreach. I believe that the Polynesian bloodline and the Polynesian people need to be recognized as all native peoples of the world should be recognized. And I feel that instead of doing what the British have done, which is ignore all of their history and just point out, oh, the United States, the United States with the Native Americans, the United States with the Native Americans. No, we know about the Boer Wars. We know what you did to the Samoans. We know what you did to the New Zealanders. We know what you did in India. We know what you did in Africa. We know what you did all over the world. We know that Great Britain started the slave trade here in the United States. We know that was Queen Elizabeth I. We're not dumb. Most Americans are uneducated. They're focused on the same thing as most of your folks are focused on. Breeding, sowing them royal oats, getting pretty things, getting that prestige and stepping on the man below you. One of the things that I can tell you from personal experience, there were Samoans when I lived in Washington State, and the way that I was treated by the Samoans in my neighborhood, with the exception of the one who was a bully, he was a bully because he was small and his entire family were very, very large. I mean, I would have guessed that there was most of his family was in the 6 foot to 6'4" range, if not larger. And then the other part of his family were all, or nearly all of them, 5'4" or shorter. It was very strange how much of a difference there was. Not many people in between. But I remember that when they had a family gathering, a birthday, a wedding, anything like that, everyone was invited. If they saw you walking down the street, complete stranger, they're having a wedding reception and they're inviting every stranger comes by with a happy greeting and a banana leaf with some goodies inside. The banana leaf, I don't know if that's a traditional thing there. I always was taught that we get our bananas from South America and that bananas are South American. I don't know about that. I know one of the things that the British did with agriculture was take plants from all over the world and transplant them all over the world in places they thought their sailors would land. That way there would always be provisions for the sailors. We also know that that's resulted in a lot of native species ending up dead. We also know that bringing in invasive species has resulted in a lot of native species ending up dead. And then we have this long history of the British, when they get caught with their pants down, they want to point out, look at America though. Look at America. Look at France. Look at France. Look at China. See, look at China over there. Look at China. Oh, you guys, all y'all Polynesians. Hey, well, guess what? Hey, Samoa, them Hawaiians is talking smack. Common tactic. Tongans, same thing. The British did this with everybody. The British basically conquered the world by creating a Cold War everywhere. Well, we'll go whisper in this person's ear, and then we'll whisper something else in this person's ear. And then we'll say, oh, well, we didn't know. We didn't know. We didn't know. We didn't know. Look at the United States. Look at the United States. Forget about Australia. Look at the United States. Forget about India. Look at the United States. Forget about the Iroquois and the Algonquin. Look at the United States. Forget about the Maori. Look at the United States. Look at the United States. Forget about South America. Look at the United States. Forget about Africa. Look at the United States. The United States, the United States, the United States. And nobody globally, out of all of the European powers, nobody has enslaved more peoples than the British Empire. Nobody. Nobody. Nobody has slaughtered more native populations worldwide than the British. They've killed more people with diseases. They've killed more people through infighting, intentionally created infighting. They've killed more people by conquest. They've killed more people by bombing. The British people, throughout the entirety of their history, it has been a non-stop history of going after the people, killing civilians in warfare. Not just back in Cook's day, not just back in Admiral Nelson's day. World War I as well, World War II as well, and forcing subject nations to fight their battles. Yes, in many of those cases, it was forced. There's more than one story of people in India saying, yeah, we're a British subject nation, but we need to be able to defend India. That's what our defense force was created for. This is not an expeditionary force, but the British, they just changed the name and send those Indian regiments across over into Europe. What happened there? Well, a whole bunch of Indians, actual Indians from actual India, ended up getting shot because they didn't want to get on some rickety fucking cargo vessels and go floating through a bunch of German-held fucking U-boats. These were world wars. These were long sea voyages. These were stupid things to do. Oh, and by the way, several of those transports were sank, as they knew would happen. Lots of innocent people dying. Am I making excuses for what's happened to the Native Americans? No, I think it's abhorrent, and I think there's a lot of things we can do to make things better here. But you know what? That starts with not kicking ourselves in the asses, because while we're busy kicking ourselves in the asses because we've got the British and the French and the Africans, the Asians, Russians are Asians, just so you know, all wanting to point out what the United States did to Native Americans. Absolutely, the United States government did that. And absolutely, Native American tribes did those things to each other. And the British did those things to Native tribes. And the French did those things to Native tribes. And the Dutch did those things to Native tribes. And so did Portugal. And so did Spain. Then, of course, you got to take a look at the north coast of Africa and the horrible atrocities committed there. The British pissed off people worldwide, and the only thing that kept them going was their navy. The fact they could bring so much naval power to bear. Well, now their navy ain't shit. They ain't prepared for war. Japan's not prepared for war. Even the United States is not prepared for war. Look how many long, drawn-out wars we have fought in my lifetime. And we keep losing. Lost in Afghanistan. Lost in Iraq. We won in Kuwait, sort of. Then we go back further. Vietnam, we certainly lost that. How about the first Korean War? Well, we called that a draw, but technically we got our asses whooped. We go after smaller nations. We don't want to go get into it unless we have overwhelming firepower, overwhelming numbers, overwhelming superiority. And even bombing weddings and mosques wasn't enough. We still lost, didn't we? Greatest nation on earth. More of a military budget than anybody else. And here we are getting our asses kicked. By minor nations. Why do we consider them minor nations? You could fit every single landmass in the world, all inside of the area, the Polynesian Triangle. That goes from Hawaii to Easter Island to, God, there's one more island. It's a huge area. You could fit Africa there, and Asia, and Europe, and South America, and North America. You could fit all those land masses there, and Antarctica, all in that area. So that would make them the largest nation on Earth if they were a unified nation. Just something to consider. British subjugation has only somewhat ended. But the superiority thing, the same superiority issue they've held for the entire time, the same superiority issue that Napoleon Bonaparte had, the same superiority issue that Adolf Hitler had, the same superiority issue that the Japanese Navy and Japanese Army had issues with, butting heads with each other during World War II. Teaching your peoples that you are superior in some way or for some reason. British Stoicism. Alright, someone calling himself Hussein Najmi type. Following Sean from Saudi Arabia, I like his history knowledge. Tell us about 1916 Skies Pico Agreement in your coming podcast, please. You know, that's something I'll have to look up, but I certainly will. Good to be with you. Thanks for coming to visit. Stay out of trouble or don't get caught. Remember, you are your brother's keeper or your sister's. No victim left behind.